Ukraine just cut off Russia's oil lifeline. Hello and welcome to our channel, where we keep you in the loop on the most important news stories affecting global markets and the economy. It's me. In today's video, we're going to expose how Ukraine just cut off Russia's oil lifeline. But before we start, I have a question for you. If you want to receive economic insights and investment ideas from me every week, then make sure to subscribe because we drop a new video every single week. Let's get right into it. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has been met with swift and strong economic sanctions from Western countries, including the United States, the European Union, Canada, Switzerland, Japan, Australia, and the United Kingdom. All these countries are members of the G7 and NATO group, which combined hold 62% of the world's wealth. And all these countries aim to punish Russia's aggressive move by cutting Russia away from the global financial system, freezing their foreign reserves and blocking access to international capital markets. By doing so, they aim to bankrupt Russia's government and force them to stop the war. However, there's one thing that the West cannot take away from Putin, and that is oil. As long as Russia keeps producing crude oil, they will continue to earn money and finance their military machine. However, this may soon change because Ukraine just cut off Russia's oil lifeline. But what does this mean? Keep watching. The first thing you need to know about Russia's oil production is that although Russia is the third largest producer of crude oil globally, producing 11.2 million barrels per day, most of their oil production comes from the West. In fact, 74% of Russia's total oil exports go to Europe. Poland, Belarus, China, and India account for the remaining 26%. When the war started, the West made a promise to sanction Russian oil. However, they were hesitant to do it because it would disrupt the energy supply of many European nations who were dependent on Russian oil, especially Germany, Austria, Slovakia, and Hungary. For example, 56% of Germany's natural gas came from Russia before the invasion. So if the West cuts off Russia's oil lifeline, it will cause chaos in the global oil markets. And this is exactly what we're seeing happening today. For example, when the West started seizing Russian assets, banning Russian banks from SWIFT and closing down their access to foreign reserves, it was pretty clear that Russian oil companies would be able to access insurance and reinsurance from Western companies. Without this insurance, they cannot export their oil to the rest of the world. And since tankers are not willing to transport uninsured oil, Russia's oil production is getting trapped inside the country. To solve this problem, Putin asked Iran and Venezuela for help. Putin reached out to Iran because they are both suppliers of crude oil and both need to sell more oil to the world. Since Iranian oil is also sanctioned by the West, they can only sell their oil to a handful of countries, meaning there isn't much demand for Iranian oil. And with Russian oil being sanctioned, they can sell their excess oil to Iran and Venezuela. In exchange, Russia can sell their oil to Iran and Venezuela and help them bypass Western sanctions. However, this deal never materialized because Iranian officials rejected Putin's offer and said they do want to help Russia because they do want to jeopardize their nuclear deal with the West. With Iran out of the picture, Russia turned to Venezuela, but they face a similar problem. The Maduro regime is already struggling to find buyers for their oil, which is why they're investing in cryptocurrency to find alternative ways to trade oil. So neither Iran nor Venezuela could help Russia sell their oil. With this, Russia had only two options left: either sell their oil at discounted rates or build new pipelines to Asia to transport their oil. However, the first option is not feasible because Russia doesn't want to become the world's swing producer. You see, Saudi Arabia and the United States work hard to stabilize the oil prices. Do this through OPEC+, an organization that controls 30% of the world's crude oil production. Whenever oil prices rise too high, the Saudis and the Americans increase their production to bring down prices. Similarly, whenever oil prices fall too low, they decrease production to raise prices. However, if Russia starts selling their oil at discounted rates, they will become the swing producer and the stabilizer of oil prices. And that job goes to the US and Saudi Arabia. Plus, it would damage their relationship with OPEC. So discounting their oil wasn't an option for Putin. This leaves us with the second option, building new pipelines to Asia. Now, Russia's oil giant Transneft is in the process of building new pipelines to China and India. However, These pipelines won't be completed anytime soon, and Russia needs to transport their oil now. This is where Ukraine comes in. Russia uses Ukraine's southern oil pipeline network to export oil to Turkey and further to world markets. Once in Turkey, the oil is transported onto tankers and shipped to different parts of the world. Recently, the company that owns the southern oil pipeline, Odessa, announced that it will suspend all operations on May, which means Russia will lose another oil lifeline. On top of this, Ukraine will also ban all oil exports starting June. This means Russia will not be able to use Ukraine to export their oil anymore. Now, Russia could technically use other routes, such as the northern one, which transports oil from Russia to Finland and further to world markets. Or they could use the eastern one, which transports oil from Russia to Kazakhstan and further to China. However, the northern route has a capacity of only 1 million barrels per day, which is way less than Russia's current exports of 5 million barrels per day. And the eastern route is currently tapped out, because China has bought all the available oil from Russia. In fact, China even increased their oil imports by 12% last year to store up on cheap Russian oil. Plus Russia woe, and be able to use these pipelines to ship oil to other destinations like India and Turkey. And this is exactly what we're seeing happening today. Since the invasion, Russia's oil exports have dropped by 1 million barrels per day. Back in April, Russia exported 5.1 million barrels of oil to the world. However, in May, their exports fell to 4.1 million barrels. Exports to China also fell from 1.6 million barrels to 900,000 barrels. And exports to India fell from 800,000 barrels to just 50,000 barrels. This tells us that Ukraine's blockade is working. And in the coming months, we will likely see Russia's oil exports plummet. And this is a nightmare scenario for Russia. And things can get worse for Putin, because the West has threatened to implement a price cap on Russian oil. A price cap on Russian oil would limit the amount of money Russia can earn from their oil exports. In fact, if the West implements a price cap on Russian oil, they might even ban the purchase of Russian oil. That way, Russia will not be able to earn any money from their oil industry. And this could cause massive financial problems for Russia. Now, you might be wondering, why hasn't Russia built more pipelines to China yet? Well, the reason for this is because China has no spare refining capacity. Right now, they're already running at maximum capacity. And if Russia wants to ship more oil to China, they will have to reduce China's domestic oil production and redirect it to other refineries. And China is not willing to do that. You see, China is still growing at a fast rate, and they need a lot of energy to keep growing. Their oil demand rose by 12% last year alone. And if they reduce their oil production now, their economy will slow down. And that's something Xi Jinping doesn't want to happen, especially during his third term as president. Now, here's the good news. Lower Russian oil production is good for the rest of the world, because it will lower inflation. Higher oil prices contribute to higher inflation because they increase the cost of transporting goods. In fact, higher oil prices are the main contributors to the current inflation crisis. And this is why lower Russian oil production is good for the world. However, if the West wants to use this opportunity to put pressure on Russia, they will have to ban the purchase of Russian oil and impose a price cap on it. And this is why Ukrainian President Zelensky is calling on the West to boycott Russian oil. He says it's time for the West to stop buying Russian oil, even if it costs them more. Now, here's the problem. A boycott on Russian oil will definitely hurt Europe, because they are still dependent on Russian oil to run their economies. For example, Germany is still importing 50 billion cubic meters of natural gas from Russia every year. And if they stop importing Russian gas and oil, it will disrupt their domestic industries and send their inflation numbers through the roof. And this is why German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is hesitant to stop buying Russian oil. Plus, banning Russian oil would disrupt the oil markets. Oil prices could spike higher, causing inflation to soar. And this is why no country in the world wants to touch Russian oil. However, if the West manages to convince Asian countries like India and China to stop buying Russian oil, it will send a clear message to Putin that they're serious about punishing Russia. And that could force Putin to end the war. But whether India and China will agree to this is a whole other story. If you want to learn more about the Russian invasion of Ukraine, I suggest you check out my video on the 5 biggest blunders of the Russian army. We'll see you there.